Welcome to the Week in IndyCar on the Marshall Pruett podcast, presented by Cooper Tires. It's a reunion, huh? My original co-host. That's right, he gave up after about 6 months. He couldn't hang anymore. Robin Miller, how you doing, my friend?
Well, I was holding out for more money, and when that didn't come forward, I caved.
I pay in stickers, as you've learned.
I know. You were very helpful. Your generosity with the A.J. Foyt sticker was a big help towards the old chemo treatments, and much appreciated, as you know.
Oh, don't start that silliness, Miller. Well, you had the good fortune of getting rained on for 2 days in Barber. I guess you could say I was a lazy bum at home, recovering from this viral infection, which is on the downhill slope, so recovery, which is really slow, is happening, so that's good. No longer a pirate, can see with both eyes, no issues there. Tell me about takeaways from the event in a general sense, Robin, because we're going to get into some of the finer parts about how IndyCar handled this rain delay and some other things, but what comes to mind? Was it the how impressive Newgarden was? Was it the bad fortune that seems to follow Bourdais? What sticks out a day later?
I think the first thing is how many people were there on Friday and Saturday, and the weather was spectacular, and I think they were looking for their best crowd ever on Sunday. They were talking about, the walk-up. A lot of people wait and see how the weather is, and of course it was just miserable, and it was raining, and I think what was sad is they do such a good job of promoting the race, and I think that was the other thing that was kind of hard to take, was the expectations were so good, and then Sunday was kind of a letdown when, and there were still more people on Sunday than I thought there'd be, but I mean, it was just, when it started raining, it rained us sideways for like 2 hours. So then I think once everything got started I think the fact that Newgarden threw down the lap he did to win the pole, that kind of, I think that impressed a lot of people. I know Ryan had raced it. I don't know where that came from, man. That was pretty impressive. And then the race itself, just the fact that, I thought everybody did a pretty good job. I mean, Firestone makes great tires, but we don't have three different compounds of rain tires like they do in Formula One, and they have a new rain tire coming out in Detroit. So, I'm sure maybe if they had a really they spent all kinds of money and built a super rain tire, that maybe there would have never been a red flag and guys could have kept racing. But we don't have very many situations like that. So the people. Two things happened, Marshall. The people were all screaming and yelling. We should have started the race at noon on Sunday. You could see the weather coming. Well, they wanted to blame it on NBC, but it wasn't NBC. NBC could have done it. NBC could have probably gone as early as 12:30. There's something about the tickets. You can only go an hour before. You can never start the race until an hour before the listed ticket price, or you're open to lawsuits. That's what we were told. And
the time listed on the ticket.
NASCAR's done something, and I think they've rewritten their policies about that. So that you knew it was coming, and you just kind of figured, what would we need, 14 more minutes or 10 more laps or something like that, and they'd got it done. But I just thought, Newgarden had one moment when he took off at the start and was, he had a 10-second lead instantly, and I just think he's won 3 times there, and he's got lots of strength. It's not just road courses, but that course really plays in his strength. And the way the race unfolded, before the restart, I was talking to everybody. We did a pre-race show, so I interviewed a few drivers, and they were like, you can probably make it on one stop if you get 5 laps of yellow, and then Dixon and Bourdais were going to make it happen because nobody saves fuel like Dixon. And Bourdais was a guy, after I found him about an hour and a half after the race, and he's like, man, it was checkmate. I had him. If it doesn't start raining, I'm going to win that race. And I think Newgarden, one of our stories on Racer today, said he thought he'd had trouble, but Bourdais said he was saving his tires and fuel, and he was going to be able to really go after it. So it would have been interesting because I think it would have been a hell of a race between the two of them down the stretch.
Yeah, I think the strategy call that Bourdais was on Sunday certainly had the makings of something fun that could have played out. at the same time, if we just throw any concept of strategy out the window, we know that Newgarden was just darn fast. And you could say, well, he was planning on 2 stops. Bourdais was trying to do 1, so there was some conservation going on with the Dale Coyne with Vassar Sullivan team, and Newgarden with Team Penske was just cut loose. But it wasn't... Let's just say that Joseph didn't pull out 10 seconds because Seb gave up 10 seconds, because he was trying to cruise just to make that a one-stopper, regardless of what strategy they were on. Sure, there was some conservation at play on Seb's side, but Joseph was just the class of the field there. I realize that had strategy played out normally, there could have been an overtake there late in the race, but again, just on pure pace, whether he was saving or not, I don't think Seb had the outright pace, but just interesting to see how far ahead, as you mentioned, Newgarden was at a place that just seems to really, really fit him. I mean, that kid loves attacking that track. Another point that I've written about that apparently it's not going to go up until the end of the week, but this was the first race for me, Robin, where Rossi did not look like he was capable of winning. And that's coming off of 3 straight races to open the season where he looked like he could. Where, at least the pace was there to win. We know that Phoenix was a little bit of a stretch. He had to do crazy amounts of passing to make up time there. But overall, the first 3 races, Rossi looked like he could have gone 3-0, or 3 for 3, I should say. This was the first weekend where they were quick, no argument, but first weekend of 2018 for me where they just looked like they were off a tiny bit. And on the other hand, Hunter-Reay was actually the raciest one in the team there. That surprised you that Rossi seemed like there was something not quite there this weekend? Or were we just getting too comfortable with him being, the almost the class of the field, the opening 3 rounds?
Oh, I don't know. I think probably it's just so, a 0.2 of a second, and you could be 6th or you could be 15th. I mean, I think if it stays wet, he's going to be a factor. I think if it just, I think he was kind of hoping it kept raining because I think he would have been heard from. But I think Hunter-Reay obviously needed a good weekend, and he drove well. And I think we got to tell people. I mean, I think if they did read our stories and watch the race, I mean, Seb was pretty cool after the race. He's like, I owe it to Dale. Dale wanted to gamble and just try and. He goes, I was hanging on for dear life. And Craig Hampson, I think one of the quotes he gave us was, we stayed out 3 laps too long. We should have brought him in. But it's Dale's team. He's a gambler. He wanted to try it. And if one guy spins off the track, they win the race because it's a timed race. And by the time you get everybody out there to drag the guy back on the track, it's over. So was it worth a gamble? Probably, but you also look at Seb, and he's he's fighting for the championship. I mean, if he gets any kind of a break at Long Beach to go and things work out the way they should have Sunday, and he finishes 2nd, hell, he's probably 2nd or 3rd in the points instead of 6th. So, I mean, he's like, this isn't the old Dale Coyne team where you're trying to steal a Carlos Huertas victory in Houston. You got one of the best drivers in the series. And their pit stops are good, and their engineering's great, and Todd Phillips and the boys do a good job. So, Bourdais a factor everywhere, and he wants to win a championship. So I understand both sides.
Let's look at a couple other aspects of performances during the event, the 2-day race, before we get into some of the overarching items from the event outside of the on-track bits. Scott Dixon, another strange weekend for the Chip Ganassi team. I mean, if you look at Dixon's results this year, Robin, nothing to be super alarmed about. Came out of Barber, 7th in the points. He was 6th to start the season at St. Pete, 4th at Phoenix, 11th at Long Beach. Obviously, they kind of goofed there, pitting when they shouldn't have when the pits were closed, got dinged. 6th again at Alabama. I do think it's strange, though, that here we are, with the first quarter of the season down. We haven't really seen Dixie fighting hard, race contender right up front. He's been on the fringes, And I think, to me, that's one of the stranger parts of the year. We haven't seen, that driver or that team really, with his entry, fighting for a win yet. What comes to mind there? Does that also stand out to you as a strange or unexpected component so far?
Yeah, I think it definitely. I mean, he's when you look at his career, you're so accustomed to him to. I mean, he ran second. He run second 5 times at Barber, and really and truly, they were talking about. He was one of the guys that we kept mentioning, I think, on the broadcast about he was saving fuel, it was looking good, and then when it started raining, it ruined his chances. I still think he would have been behind Seb. I don't think he'd have big board A. So could he have finished second? Yeah, probably, or third. But I don't know. It's interesting because Scott's pretty honest about things, and he's like, you know what, we missed it here. He just hasn't gone out and grabbed a race by the throat like he usually does yet. But we're only 4 races in, so I would say it's only a matter of time, I imagine. But I think he's certainly one of the storylines yet that he hasn't been close to winning a race.
Let's look at 2 other oddities for me among the drivers. We'll get to the old Simon Pagenaud, Gabby Chavez curse fest here in a minute, and Gabby is going to join me a little later as our second guest for the week. But Simon is someone 15th in points. Bizarre, truly bizarre seeing Simon stuck in a rut, you could say. Similar position of I can't seem to recall him being in a place where he was challenging for a very meaningful position. Obviously got taken up by Graham Rahal at Long Beach, so he never had a chance really there. But Simon's in a weird place, and he is just 6 points in front of Spencer Pigot in 16th, Robin. And that, for me, with Spencer, that might actually be the biggest oddity of the early season. We know that his teammate Jordan King has come in. Jordan did well in GP2 and F2, but certainly did not set the world on fire. His best championship finish was a 7th. Had 2 wins in 3 years. Not bad, but definitely not something that has people here or in F1 going, ooh, next world champion, here we come. So I don't think many of us expected Jordan to come over in his first season in IndyCar with Ed Carpenter Racing as Spencer Pigot's teammate and be ahead of Spence at any point in time. In reality, that's all that's happened. Jordan's made the Firestone Fast 6 once on his debut, made the Fast 12 in his next race at Long Beach. Last weekend at Barber, Spencer did out-qualify him. I think it was 17th, and Jordan was 19th. I find this really bizarre. It makes me wonder if there's something not clicking on the engineering front or what's going on, because no disrespect to Jordan King, but seeing how heavily he has been outrunning Spencer in qualifying and then often in the races before something goes wrong, makes me really wonder why Spence is not on that same form we saw him last year on a part-time basis, Robin, where, man, we're not saying the kid was going to win, but he put in a bunch of storming drives. But so far, his rookie teammate, who's never been to these tracks, is essentially leading the team with pace. Weird one, isn't it?
Well, here's the thing. Spencer needs a good result, and I was really hopeful after practice on Saturday. He had second quick time, so you're thinking,
yep,
perfect. He's at least going to be in the Fast 12, maybe the Fast 6. And I don't know what happened. They missed it bad in qualifying. So he needs a good result, and he needs to qualify better. And when a guy comes in that hasn't been to these tracks before and is beating you, that's certainly something to probably be concerned with. Because here's the thing: you only get so many chances in this series, and Ed's gone. I give Ed big props because he believes in Spencer, so he brought him back full time. And this is your year to make it. You gotta start putting things together. And I think everybody was talking to Lee Diffie on Saturday, and he said, well, really like to see Spencer have a good result, and then he has second quick time. So we're thinking this might be the weekend. This is where it's going to come from, because he's had good runs in the last year and a half. It just never resulted in that great a finish. Something happened. It wasn't either his fault or he spun out, or like at Barber a couple years ago when he was running third or fourth. So as far as Pagano, I mean, Phoenix, he was right up front, and then he had a good penalty, and then Graham punts him, and he was okay at Barber. They just off, he pitted early for that early strategy, and that got hosed when it started raining. So he just hadn't had much luck. I think his pace hadn't been too bad. It's just, when you look at Will's season, I mean, he's crashed. What's he crashed? Two out of the 4 races he crashed, or
might even be 3. Yeah.
Yeah, and Joseph is just. It's amazing that somebody can come in and just. He's not. I'm not saying he's taken over, but he certainly looks like the team leader right now, doesn't he? I mean, he's leading the points again, and he's got 2 wins and all the confidence in the world, no matter what it's an oval or road course or street course. So, I think it's kind of interesting how it's kind of shaken out, because you got Rossi, he was leading the points, and now Newgarden's there, and it's always good to see a couple of Americans up there battling for the championship, and you're going to, I mean, Power's going to be heard from, Pagano will be heard from. Graham Rahal, if he hasn't had a really, really good race weekend yet, I don't think. I mean, I think he'd agree with that, and he's third or fourth in the points because he's made something out of nothing. I mean, now, again, I don't know, last or second, and then he gets penalized at Long Beach and finishes 5th, and I think he ends up 7th or 6th or 7th yesterday after, not qualifying very well. So his race pace has been good. It's just this is the kind of year, if something happens and you win, this is the kind of year that if you win a championship, you look back and think, my God, I was, I get the absolute maximum out of how we qualified and how we practiced. So who else stands out? I guess, I think Tony Kanaan will be heard from in May. I think the Indy 500 will be his. I think that's where we're looking for him to be his strong suit, and his teammate. Matt's had a couple of good moments. I mean, the rookies. Look at Zach Veach. Zach's had a couple of good runs. So the rookie class with Jordan King, and we even talked about Wickens, and he was impressive as hell over the weekend because he missed the whole first practice day with all kinds of problems, and he comes back out and he's right there. I mean, he's in practice, he's second or third right away. That guy's, I think he's really up to Hinch's game. I think Wickens has been good for Hinch because Hinch is driving really well. So again, we've had 4 races and we've had 3 different winners, but I think come to the month of May again. The Indy 500 is wide open. There's 10, 11 guys could win it, and that's what you want to see because I think Chevy and Honda are pretty even, don't you?
I do. The fuel mileage aspect is really interesting. It seems like Chevy might have a little something in terms of top-end speed. So that is, of all the things I'm looking forward to learning at the Indy GP, since there are a couple of other road courses we go to this year with nice long straightaways. That's the one that I think is going to be very revealing for us. We've seen at St. Pete and at Long Beach that Honda continues to hold an advantage on low end. Their torque shooting off of hairpins and really accelerating hard there. It's the places that we saw last weekend at Barber where there's a little bit of momentum through some of these corners and getting into, a high-speed situation where when the Chevys aren't having to battle the Hondas off of low-speed corners, they really seem to distinguish themselves once they get to top end. But the fuel mileage thing as well, definitely something interesting for us to track. So I want to go back to 2 drivers you mentioned, Robin, and get into this a little bit. Interesting dynamic within Team Penske with this Newgarden kid, and also with this new universal aero kit everyone is having to grasp and master. I think it's really interesting if you look at Newgarden versus Pagano. So here we have the 2 most recent IndyCar champions. We have Simon, who we know that among the 3 Penske drivers, obviously including Will Power, he has the most diverse background, right? Sports car champion, rally driver. I mean, you throw Simon in anything, and he's going to be fast. I think what we're seeing, though, Robin, and this is really interesting, at least for me, is limitation, a little bit of a limitation with Simon and this new aero kit, insofar that although Simon is fast in everything that he drives, he's very particular. He's someone who, while he has a versatile skill set and can climb into any car and do well, he still needs those cars to be close to perfect for him to extract the maximum. And that there's a unfortunate side to that as well, which is if the car isn't just right or isn't as close to perfect as he wants and needs, we see that he is trailing his teammates by a little bit. You flip that around to someone like Newgarden, and not only are he and Brian Campy, his engineer, working incredibly well and getting a lot out of the aero kit. They've really been doing a great job finding the right setups, Robin, but we know for sure that Joseph's car hasn't been perfect at every track. There have been places where, he has been struggling to find exactly what he wants from the car, but he seems to be less bothered by that. I think one of the things that's standing out trend-wise within Team Penske is while Pagenaud might be universal, throw him in anything, the conditions really have to be just what he wants to get the most. I think what we're seeing with Newgarden is, I don't know if it's he's numb and doesn't notice, or if he doesn't care and is willing to just drive around it, but it seems like pitted with the same situation where the car might not be what he wants, Newgarden is still getting a really high percentage out of it. And I think it's that little thing that's starting to show. I think that's starting to make the difference. Obviously, we've discussed that Simon's had a lot of misfortune this year, but I still think that, on their day, if both of them have cars that aren't just right, I think in almost every situation, Newgarden's going to come out ahead, because he doesn't let that detract from his lap time and detract from his performances. So that could be something here, Robin, that, not just over this season, but seasons to come, that could be the one thing that really helps Joseph cement himself as, Penske's next Rick Mears, Sam Hornish, Gilles de Ferran, a guy who's just bedrock, always delivering, always there for him. What have you seen from Joseph that makes you think this kid will just, whatever it is, I'll make the most out of it? And have you seen anything from Simon that makes you think that's an area he needs to step up if he wants to match and overtake the young American?
No, I don't know. I just think it seems to be a pretty healthy. I think those guys push each other pretty hard, and obviously Will's always part of the mix too. It's just that Newgarden's got so much confidence right now, and I think when you walk into a situation like he did and you win the championship, and you obviously have some chemistry with Brian Campy, and you're, I think he expects a lot. I think Joseph expects a lot of himself, and but he's just got everything going his way right now, and I think that's racing so much confidence and so much looking forward to we were joking yesterday about how good he's done at Barber, and he's like, I really like Barber, but he goes, man, I like lots of tracks. There's just, this is one of my favorites. Sure it is, but he goes, I feel comfortable anywhere we go right now, and I think it's displayed every time he goes out and practices and qualifies. So, but Pagenaud and Ben Bretzman have a good, they got good chemistry, and Faustino and Power. So. They all, the team won 10 races last year. They're certainly they're not gonna be shut out. The other guys on the team aren't gonna be shut out, I don't think. But I think Newgarden is just right now. Him and Rossi and Bourdais are right now the three guys that I think that you're looking at week in and week out are the guys that you have to beat. And then Hunter Ray is another guy that's kind of waiting in the wings, and Ray Hall, and I think Hinch and Wickens, I think they're going to win a race. I just think the possibilities are endless when you look at all the guys in the series. That, and it sounds like it used to be the laugh. We used to laugh when they say anybody. The NASCAR race would be under the parade lap, and they say anybody here, 43 drivers, anybody could win. Yeah, right. But at IndyCar, there's really 12 guys. At least half the field could win the race, and that's what I like about it.
Let's switch gears, Robin, and talk about, for me, what was the major talking point from the weekend, and I think one of probably the biggest missteps by IndyCar in an otherwise stellar year for the series, and that was how they handled the rain delay. So you and I have spoken about this privately, so, dear listeners, Robin and I are effectively rehashing a conversation we've already had just on our own, but one thing stood out to me, and I think was really cemented for me after looking at how IndyCar, in my opinion, screwed up pretty heavily in what they did in allowing or in letting some changes happen overnight and not letting other changes happen, and really not adhering to the strict, we pause the race, we're coming back tomorrow to resume it, everyone hold position, don't touch the cars. It's like we are freezing everything and coming back tomorrow and unfreezing it and continuing to go. The fact that they let teams refuel overnight, knowing that during those 23 laps on Sunday, strategy calls had already been made. Pagenaud wanted to pit early. There were those on the one stop who were, wanting to overtake the two stoppers, like we mentioned with Newgarden and Bourdais. The allowance for teams to, or for the techs to re-energize push to pass, so everyone went back to, the full complement there. Just these things that, honestly, manipulating the game, and I think it just does not respect what the series should be, if we think of it like any other major professional sport. The thing that stood out to me most, Robin, and this is maybe also rolling in some of the questionable penalties that have been handed out this year, I look back at Barber and the screw-up in how they handled this delay and really think they're missing a veteran like Brian Barnhart in race control, helping to say, no, we're not going to do this. That's silly. Let's just stay the course. And, it seems to me like with Brian's absence, with him now being the president of Harding Racing, like there's just too much of this community. Hey, let's sit down and talk, and what do you think? And we'll workshop ideas, and we'll ignore this rule, but stick to that one. And hey, anyone who's crashed, you can't work on your cars under the red flag, so you have to wait until the race resumes to do that. Meanwhile, you're letting teams refuel. Again, it's just this random, hey, we're going to talk about it, and we'll come up with whatever we come up with. Man, I could be wrong. Tell me if you think I am, but it seems to me that IndyCar's 2018 race control is really lacking that veteran voice to go, whoa. Calm down, guys. This is nothing unusual. We're just going to stick to a very basic plan of race is frozen, come back tomorrow and resume, and it's just going to continue exactly how it stopped.
Well, I spent a lot of time with mechanics yesterday since our flight was delayed 5 hours. So most of them, 90% of them were surprised when they got to the track that they were allowed to refuel and put on dry tires or slicks. And but most of the guys said what people shouldn't think is they all said, even the guys who were on some of the teams with the strategy of pitting early, like. When it started raining and they had the 5 laps to yellow, he said that pretty much hosed them anyway. So that didn't affect the strategy as much. I guess it's just, as far as the other thing that was said last night a couple of mechanics said, did you ever think that we'd be saying we missed Brian Barnhart? The thing that Brian did good was run the race. You go to a driver's meeting and the way he laid things out. And the other thing was. And I think Bo and Barfield and Brian both tried to do this. They didn't try and ruin somebody's race. Like at Long Beach, I think if Brian would have been there, that Bourdais and Dixon would have got another 2 seconds, and they would have been able to pit, and it wouldn't have ruined their race. And maybe that comes with time and doing that job. And but as far as the rule book, it's interesting because they stuck to the rule book, but to the letter with the Bourdais situation at Long Beach. I mean, they were adamant about that. We made a rule and we stuck to it, and that's what these guys want to rules. Yet it looks like that they don't really stick to the rule every time. This this unavoidable contact is almost comical. I mean, it's like every week it's a different. Sometimes guys get penalized and sometimes they don't. I don't understand that one at all.
Yeah, Charlie Kimball was still fuming over what he said was getting hit by Ed Jones from behind and get knocked out of the race. And Ed told me, I did hit him. It wasn't intentional. And from Ed's perspective, he said Charlie was already half spinning when he hit him. Again, a difference of accounts between the two. But to your point, consistency is the thing, though, isn't it, Robin? That's whether you're the hardest, meanest, most unflinching race steward. I don't care why or what. That's the letter of the law, and you're being penalized. Or you're the softest one, and you swallow the whistle and let everything happen. Consistency is the one thing people look for, and so to me, that's why the overnight calls and changes to the race. That's what frustrated me. And it has nothing to do, honestly, with who might have had an advantage or who lost an advantage. It really had nothing to do with the individual teams and players. It was respect the game, right? Freeze it, resume it. Don't make up things in the middle of, but we'll let you do these couple things. Oh, but you can't do what we've had folks ask, and we'll get to them in a minute. Well, why was it a timed race then? If you're going to allow these some changes, if you're just going to randomly say, okay, hey, you can do some of these things, why not go for a full 90 laps? Why not just treat Monday as if Sunday never existed? There's just, again, it's when you're this kind of half-pregnant situation where you go, hey, guys, just be consistent. Either let anybody do anything or stick to the plan. But kind of farting around in the middle, I just think that's an area where IndyCar needs to realize that's where you piss off fans, that's where you piss off teams, because it really is not the standard way of doing things. Like I said, it's great when you get everyone together and, hey, what do you think? And we're gonna workshop it and come up with a plan. There's also value in saying we're just going to stick to the norm and freeze it, go back to racing, and let it just play out naturally. When you start manipulating things, that's when IndyCar, in my opinion, is really getting it wrong.
Yeah, because I really give Jay credit for listening to the paddock and Bill Pappas and Tino Belli and with the new aero kit and just not making knee-jerk reactions to certain things and kind of thinking things through before they make rules. I think they've done a really good job about that. So just continue, to your point, just continue that philosophy. It's okay to talk to people about certain things, but when it comes to something like, if you're talking about going by the rule book, then I think you got to pretty much go by the rule book all the time.
Not every situation needs a coalition. Not everything needs a panel assembled to again, this I think is the downside of that super open policy. But again, no one got hurt, no one died, no one starved. This isn't the end of the world.
And the thing of it is, I don't think the fans, I'm not sure I don't know how many of the fans thought, well, okay, so they're starting on slicks and they all got the refueled it. I mean, I don't think it bothered most of the fans. They were like, okay, great, we get to watch a race. They didn't seem too, like I said, a lot of them probably were not even aware of what happened. Yep.
So, all right, crisis averted here. Let's look at a couple other fun things, and we're going to dive into our Q&A, Mr. Miller. So we had this rather strange way of red being called on Sunday that I know angered Will Power, Roger Penske. We went back to green when we had drivers who said they were openly saying it's not time. We should not do this. There are massive puddles on the straights that's going to cause aquaplaning, and I don't know if those messages weren't received up in the tower. I don't know if they were disregarded? I don't honestly know. So I'm not making any claims as to why. But I do know that drivers said they did inform the series through their radios that, we're not there. Do not do this. And we went back to green, saw Will Power get wiped out by a giant puddle, saw Newgarden almost crash, in a straight line leading away, big oversteer moment. Luckily he didn't crash, but I'm a little bit curious about why we had drivers saying, no, don't do this. They did it. Power gets wiped out, wrecked, and then, after a car crashes through no fault of his own, then we decide to go back to red. No. Okay, definitely can't run in these conditions. Part of me wonders why we had to sacrifice a car in order for this message to be fully received or fully heeded. I again, not claiming I know why that happened, but I do know that there was a feeling it was completely unnecessary to sacrifice a car before making that call. Do you agree?
Well, I mean, a lot of guys I talked to didn't think they should have stopped the race. They said keep it going. I talked to 6 guys that said we were doing fine. We could have kept going. It wasn't that bad. Then when they the majority then said they probably shouldn't have ever gone back to green in the power incident. Talking to Oriole Survey, who was driving the pace car, said he was aquaplaning the pace car all over the place and about crashed twice. So he said he was telling them the same thing, man. It's really bad out here. So, and the fans, you get this, people are like, well, these guys are pussies. They should be racing in the rain. I mean, when you can't see the nose on your car, and there's little small lakes and there's a couple rivers running across the track. I mean, you're not going to it's not going to be much of a race when it gets to that point. So people are quick to judge and say, well, these guys are pussies. Well, trust me, they run to the corner in Indianapolis doing 30 miles an hour. They're not pussies. It's just they couldn't see, and they basically almost to a man when they were calling in before they went back to that green. We're like, man, this thing is not ready. It's insane. So you just gotta, if you're going to talk to the drivers and talk to and trust what they're trying to tell you, you kind of got to listen to them. But we started a race once in Loudon. It was raining, and that was an oval, so it's not unprecedented.
Well, speaking of puddles, Robin, is that James Hinchcliffe's new nickname? After admitting he created a puddle of his own, an ammonia-scented puddle that he sat in briefly in his race car after relieving himself while circulating. Is that a fair nickname? I mean, Mayor Hinchtown's great, but I think James Puddles Hinchcliffe in light of him peeing his suit and then admitting it on NBCSN. I mean, that part's odd as well, but I think we might need some new stickers here created by our friends at Toronto Motorsports.
He's called to piss her around the world, which is kind of funny because this is really kind of how sad things are with IndyCar racing and the national. I mean, ESPN and ABC are still partners with IndyCar. They don't ever put the winner of the race on television. They never give the results. They don't even put the results across the crawl at the bottom of the sports ticker. I mean, that's how sadly they treat IndyCar. Yet, because of Hinch's really good soundbite with Kevin Lee about relieving himself, it made SportsCenter on Sunday night. It made the next the morning sports show with Jalen Rose the next morning. It was on Good Morning America. I mean, unless it's a crash like Scott Dixon's spectacular crash in Indy, or it's something like Hinch being funny like that, it's the only time IndyCar gets any publicity. So I guess we should be happy that they at least recognized that this was an IndyCar race, and they showed Hinch and they showed a little bit of the track. But it speaks volumes to me about why these people aren't very good partners to start with.
So does this mean that at the next drivers' meeting, you're going to stop the race director and suggest and ask, all right, Who's going to take a leak this race? Is this something we need to just do at every race to make sure we get on all those talk shows? Who's going to drink a gallon of milk before the race and then climb in and bombs away? Is that going to be your suggestion?
Well, if you can be as funny as Hinch is when he gives an interview, sure, but most of them aren't, so probably wouldn't get the same response, I would imagine.
Let me ask this. You've seen far more exchanges like this in your life than I have. The Gabby and Simon little curse fest after the race. I mean, first of all, it was just a pillow fight. But where does that rate among modern driver disagreements for you, knowing that there's no pushing, but there was some excellent uses and placement of F-bombs and other things back and forth between little Gabby and, I guess, mid-sized Simon?
Well, I'm just the only thing I take away from that is I'm proud of Pagenaud for having, at least he went down and confronted him face to face, didn't send his PR person or text message or something. He like a race driver should, he went down face to face, and Gabby face to face responded the way he thought he should. So, I don't know where it ranks. I would much rather see that than have them go on Twitter and start bad mouthing each other. At least do it. If you got a problem with somebody, go up and say it to their face. That's what I like to see. That's the way it should be.
We did kind of want to see a little smack, maybe Simon using his driver's glove, a little, psh, psh, across the face, something. I mean, just words. Look, we turn on hockey and
everybody
see.
Was almost gone. I saw Pagenaud. I was waiting to interview somebody, and I saw him storming through the pits. So he looked like he was on a mission. So then I learned later that's where he was going. But I don't think we had. Maybe somebody took a picture of it, or I don't know if there was any video or anything.
Oh no,
so
there was video. I
right?
wrote about it yesterday. Yeah, no, there's video. Well, let's move to Q&A, Mr. Miller, and as we've been doing now for a couple months, our friends at Toronto Motorsports, the ones who did the awesome caricatures of you and I last year, and they continue to do one each race with a new IndyCar figure. Our friends at TorontoMotorsports.com have been giving away a free Marshall Pruett Podcast t-shirt or mug, if you like drinking out of my head, which is kind of a bizarre thing, to whomever's question I like the most from the previous episode. And so this week's winner is Martin Henderson, who last week asked a question that really had Sebastian Bourdais thinking. He said, there's 10 laps remaining and you're leading the Indy 500 or in contention. When you suddenly feel a little loose in the cockpit, you look down and your safety harness has come undone. Do you pit to get it fixed, or do you keep driving and hope for the best? And he said, and if you keep going, do you ever tell anyone? I thought that was great, because Seb admitted that, while it wasn't Indy, had happened before, and he kept going. So, Martin, that was a great question, and I enjoyed Seb's answer. So, hit me with a direct message on the Marshall Pruett Podcast Facebook page or on Twitter. Give me your address, a mailing address, your email address, and whether you want a t-shirt or mug. And if it's a t-shirt, give me your size, and we will get you hooked up through TorontoMotorsports.com. All right, Robin Miller, let's... You don't like people, first of all, so I do love the fact that you're actually willing to participate in Q&A, and when I tell folks to send in questions, they do, even though they probably know you hate everyone, me included. So thank you for overlooking that. Leighton Bocking says, I know it has been asked, but come on, Robin, Twitter! Can you... I think we're going to save this, and whenever this question comes in, because it does at least 2 or 3 times a week, I'm just going to replay it. Robin Miller, why aren't you on Twitter?
It's the stupidest form of communication ever invented. All it does is piss people off, get people fired, divorced, alienates people from all walks of life, and I do that on my own without any help. So when we were both at Speed, I remember Speed used to say, hey, you ought to get on Twitter. I'm like, no, I'm not getting on Twitter. No, that will not be happening. Facebook is enough. That's good enough.
Yeah,
for me.
That is a good distinction. there's so much really positive content on Facebook. You can learn all kinds of great things about politics and you name it. So,
best thing about Facebook, brother, is all the racing pictures. You know that.
Yes, that and the fact that you can just block people really easily there. I mean, you can do the same on Twitter, but the answer is because Robin would be fired instantly from all jobs. And
because Robin's not mature enough to be on Twitter. How's that?
See? Perfect answer. Leighton's question, he says, what do you think of Marco Andretti's year so far? Will there ever be Andretti magic? And I guess this is referring to young Marco, continuing the family magic. Please answer that, Robin, and I'll add in a little bit afterwards.
Well, he qualified 7th at Barber, so I mean that was the best he's qualified in, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, I think, on a road course or street circuit. But he spun early in the race, so that kind of, that was gonna be tough to overcome that. But he was real honest after finishing 7th or 6th at Long Beach. He said, if I don't start qualifying better, well, I got to start qualifying better to get near the front. I'm never going to win a race. I can win a race, but I got to qualify better. So I think it's obvious he knows that he can go fast. That's probably the most frustrating thing. He can practice fast. He hasn't been able until last weekend to back that up in qualifying. So if you start up front, you got a shot. I mean, obviously Andretti's team's got some things figured out, so he'll want to take advantage of that. This would be a good year to do it. As far as magic goes, I mean, I'd just like to see him win a race again.
It's been a long time. Not only has it been a long time, but he's, granted, he can claim to having double the amount of victories as Danica Patrick in IndyCar, but that's also maybe not the biggest point of pride. So, Leighton, the fun little thing I wanted to throw in is during one of our final preseason Week in IndyCar podcasts, I had our mutual pal Townie Bell on as my co-host. We did some season predictions. One, as you know, Robin, although you're a degenerate gambler, you do actually make money sometimes. You know my predictions are always wrong. Yet I offer them, which is stupid. I said I thought Bourdais was really going to struggle this year, and that was all based on the feedback throughout preseason testing. Sebastian's a person who likes the back of the car to be stable, prefers a light understeer that he can work with, and everything we'd heard was, boy, this car's tendency is just to oversteer, and those things just didn't seem to match. 100% wrong, obviously. That was as bad of a prediction as I've ever made. Townsend, of course, calls me on the way to the airport to go, hey, dumbass, what about that Bourdais prediction, huh, Pruett? And one of the things we love about Townsend, right, Robin? He will always give it to you whenever necessary. The one area where I pushed back, though, Leighton, is I also said I really think Marco Andretti is going to have a good year. I didn't say career best, world champion, and that kind of stuff, but I really felt that this new aero kit was going to complement Marco's driving style and driving needs. And through 4 races, I've been kind of sort of right. He's 9th place in points, hasn't had a, charge to the front and whoop everybody type day, but he's been very competitive. And I looked back at his first 4 races throughout every season, and this right now, he's on track with his second best open to any season. So I happened to push back on Townsend about that. And just for an added bit of fun, during the qualifying broadcast on Saturday, I was blowing up Townsend's phone with texts going, Marco! When he made the Fast 12, almost made the Fast 6. And, the other great thing about Townsend is he is excellent at telling you when you are wrong, not so good at the pushback when he's wrong. So, but nonetheless, we love good old Townie Bell. All right, let's move on to our next question. Robbie Bergman says, hey, Marshall, can you guys answer why the race was timed instead of starting earlier with less pre-race show to get the whole race in? What did you hear as part of the NBCSN team, Robin? Because we got to 82 laps out of 90. Wonder if you heard anything why we couldn't have started earlier. And in theory, gotten in the whole thing.
A lot of people just assumed it was NBC's fault or their call, but it wasn't. There's some kind of a it's not an ordinance, but on the ticket, you can only start the race an hour before the posted time on the ticket, or you're open to lawsuits from people who have tickets if they missed the start of the race. So that's what everybody was told, because I think NBC, we could have gone as early as 12:30 because we had no hockey or anything ahead of us. So we would have, I think, been happy to go earlier. So as it was, we blew up the pre-race show and went right to the green flag. And then yesterday we had a pre-race show, our usual half-hour pre-race show. But as far as a timed race, when it's raining, when it starts, it was obviously early on that it was going to go to a timed race, because when you're going so much slower in the wet than you were in the dry, that's the call they made.
Yeah, and I probably phrased Robbie's question a little bit improperly. I mean, at least for the way that I was reading it, Robbie, which might have been a little bit different, it was maybe more a case of, well, why couldn't they just simply get in the final 8 laps, knowing that, again, they called it as a timed race, but at least for my mindset, if you're going to ignore other things in how they handled the freezing the race and running it the following day, part of me, Robbie, was kind of thinking the same thing, maybe a little slightly different way, not necessarily starting earlier, but like, well, you trying to tell me you couldn't get in 8 more laps to make it a full 90-lap race? Like, if you're going to ignore some things, why not just ignore the timed portion? So, but again, that's kind of playing in the middle, which I'm not a fan of, but since they were doing it, I guess that was one thing they could have done. Robin, Paul Hirsch asks, did flaggers use blue flags during the Barber race? If not, they should have. And I'm sure that there were many blue flags being used to encourage folks that a faster car was coming. As for whether all those blue flags were seen or adhered to, that's usually the even bigger question. Not sure that everybody did, and I know in the exchange between Gabby and Simon, there were probably some very serious questions as to whether blue flags were being seen, or if Gabby was aware that Simon was behind him. And when we have Gabby on here in a few minutes, I'm going to leave that to him to explain, because he wanted to set the record straight on one thing after I reached out to him. So we'll park that a little bit, Paul, but come back to that with Gabby here in just a little bit. Here's a really good question, Robin, from Stephen Killsdonk. He says, why didn't Penske repair Will Power's car overnight? And he said, thinking back to Toronto in 2014, Sarah Fisher's team repaired Newgarden's car under red conditions because the penalty was small enough that it was worth incurring and getting the car fixed. He says, looking in the 2018 rule book, it states that working on a car under red will result in a minimum 2-lap penalty, which would have been less than the time lost repairing Will's car after the race restarted. That's a really, really sharp question, Stephen.
Yes, it is.
And I will admit that I had something like that floating around the back of my head, but it was not formed nearly as sharp or as intelligently as your question here. One thing I'll note here, and I guess it's an apology, but it's also a little bit of reality. A lot of the questions that come in would involve getting about 15 people on the phone to answer each specific item, and timing doesn't always work out to do that. So in a perfect world, we'd have Tim Cindric on the phone to answer that, or Kyle Moyer. I don't know. I know that, I'm sure that IndyCar, informed the Carlin team with Charlie Kimball's car. I'm sure IndyCar informed all the teams with crashed or stricken cars that no work can be done during the red. But I don't know if there was any recognition that, what is the bigger loss? Waiting and then going down the 20-plus laps or whatever it was Will did, or to ignore the rule and hope that they only give you a 2-lap penalty, but it does say minimum 2-lap. It could have been 15. It could have been 90 laps. So, but it's a great question, Stephen. And this seems like one area where ignoring IndyCar's odd treatment of the rules overnight might have actually played to their favor. But at the same time, what I think Will finished 20th or so. Let me take a quick look here. 21st. This might have had him in 15th or, I'm not sure where he would have ended up. So I know he could have gained a few more points for sure, but one way or the other, that might end up being the question of the week. We will have to see. Let's see. Let's scroll down through here a little bit more. Here we go, Robin. If Bourdais or Pagenaud wins the 500, asks Chris G., and they eschew the milk in favor of 6 bottles of champagne, do we fans hate them as much as we did Emerson Fittipaldi, who drank orange juice on his first Indy 500 win? What do you think? The Frenchmen go champagne? Are they bad guys?
Well, there's still a couple of people who are still. I think AJ Foyt's he's always stuck in his craw that Fittipaldi drank orange juice instead of milk. He thought that was the biggest slap in the face ever. So I would think they'd probably be smart and just drink milk and not push the envelope.
Well, what was it? Jules Gou, winner of the 1913 Indy 500, was guzzling champagne. So I think if anything, and knowing that Pagenaud at least has cited Mr. Gou as a personal hero and someone he looks up to, it wouldn't surprise me if Simon won. It'd probably be kind of disgusting to consider, but I'm thinking he might be drinking milk and champagne. And I don't know how that sits on your stomach after 500 miles, but knowing how odd Pagenaud is, that sounds like something he would kind of sort of do. All right, let's see. Here's a good one, and normally I'd ask this to Gabby since he's coming on, but we covered this a little bit when he was on last time, so I'll pose it to you, Robin. Keith Lee says there's a lot of positive news in IndyCar, especially with the new TV package and various sponsorships coming through for teams. He says also it seems like the Harding team is putting together resources for a stronger organization. Give us some thoughts about that. I'll save the second part of the question, Keith, for Gabby, but what are you seeing within the Harding team with the people that they have brought on board and continue to bring on board, and where you think they could get to competition-wise within the paddock? Are you seeing a take on the big three type, or are you thinking maybe just second tier right behind them once they get a little bit more experience?
Well, I just hope they get a sponsor because Mike's spending a lot of money. His payroll. Your story of the weekend, Vince Kramer and I can't think of the engineer's name. We know Gerald Tyler. The payroll. Al Unser Jr. and Brian they don't have a sponsor. So I know the paving business is good. I hope he can hang in there while they go through their growing pains and they can keep this thing going. That's, to me, no matter how much money you got, Marshall, racing's so expensive, you got to have a sponsor. So I hope they got somebody out there beating the bushes to get them a sponsor. And
that's been the fear all along. And I posed that to Mike Harding during the preseason test at Phoenix, and he didn't want to answer too heavily, but that is the fear. Big, passionate guy wanting to come into IndyCar, businessman, not, multinational. We're not talking a Fortune 100 business, but very successful local business. You're coming in, you're buying a couple cars, you're setting up a full shop, staffing it, then you go run the full season and engine leases and tire leases. To get off the ground for season one, you're minimum $6 to $8 million, if not closer to 10 if you're, buying tractor trailers. There's a lot of money going out the door to get off the ground. And, it's something that a wealthy business person can weather to start, but then there's the natural follow-up, Robin. You've seen it, I've seen it many times before, and it's but wait, I've spent all this money. I've made this really good thing here. Why aren't sponsors flocking to it to support it? And you go, ooh, if you thought you would spend a ton up front and that there was just going to naturally be a follow-up with the phone ringing and your email blowing up and all kinds of people saying, where do I send the big checks? That pretty much is never part of the story. So for me, that's the fear. Will Mike Harding get bugged out at the fact that money isn't flowing in right off the bat come year 2, come year 3? So we hope that there are serious sponsors in the pipeline, but if not, most businessmen don't hang around for year 3, year 4 if they end up being on the hook for the entire thing. So hopefully Gabby can give us a little bit of insights on how that is indeed coming along. Let's see, Robin. We've got 1 or 2 people who have asked and would like to get some thoughts. So we have both Mike Jablow, who said, Robin, where and when can we buy the Foyt 83 Grim Reaper Zero shirts? And we also have Joshua Chrome, who said, Robin, thank you for the tough guy videos on Racer. Your shirts are great, and I love your enthusiasm for the sport. So this isn't a plug. This is just our friend and brother Robin, who has some really awesome things that IndyCar fans can buy with a lot of help from the super awesome Linda Rosenberg. Tell us about what's new and what's available on your website selling T-shirts featuring the art of Crazy Roger Warwick.
Crazy Roger Warwick. Well, I think today we're going to have it's called Indy Legends Shirt. Indy Legends Shirts. IndyLegendsShirts.com. I can't talk.
Do you need me to tell you the name of your own business?
And we'll have the AJ Foyt Attack of the Killer Bees Round 2 shirt. We'll get the new Bobby Unser 50-year anniversary of his first win shirt. We got Gordon Johncock's very first shirt ever as a 2-time Indy winner. So then we got we still got Dan Gurney. We've got Mount Rushmore. We've got the 3 4-time winners. So we appreciate everybody. It's really been cool because I saw a couple people in Alabama and they had purchased a couple of shirts online. So they'll be on sale for 2 weeks, and we'll hopefully we'll have them delivered by mid-May, so people have them before the Indy 500. But I think Steve Shunk and I we spent a lot of money in the last decade doing this because we just like giving them away to our pals, and it's neat to see the reaction of the drivers that are on them. I mean, Foyt loved his B shirt, but so many people have asked about how do we get them because they wanted to wear them. So we said, yeah, we'll just make them. We just, I think we've made it pretty. I think it's $20 for the T-shirt and $30 for the sweatshirt. And I just went to a Pacer game the other night, and the sweatshirt was $75 and the T-shirt was $50. And I'm thinking, that's insane. I mean, so at least we're not greedy. We're just trying to share everybody's passion. They all seem to like them, so we're glad to do them. And Roger, as you know, he's amazing. He takes an idea, and in 15 minutes he comes up with something that's so good that you can't even believe it.
So we're going to get the singular or plural stuff here straight. It is Indy Legends with an S, T-shirts with an S.com. Indy Legends T-shirts. Is that correct?
I think it's Indy Legends Shirts. Let me make sure of this, brother.
Look, for those of you who think Robin and I,
why would I know?
For those of you who think Robin and I are the least bit awake or have a clue, it's a sham.
Indy Legends Shirts. Let's see if we made it to Google.
It's a sham.
Indy Legends Shirts. Yeah, it's Indy Legends Shirts.
2 S's.
1 S. Indy Legends Shirts. 1 S.
1 S. Okay.
IndyLegendsShirts.com.
It's only taken us 5 minutes to figure it out.
We're actually there.
We are professional, Robin Miller. Look at that. People pay us to do this.
Buddy?
This is crazy.
Now we've got a thing. It'll probably say printed this week. I think today we're gonna. I think it went up today. This morning it'll say the next 2 weeks you're gonna order shirts, and then we'll ship on like May the 12th or something like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get back to some questions and kind of round out your good old participation here on the Week in IndyCar. Let's see. Oh, here's a good one. Ron Thompson. This is Marshall. What is the difference between a 7-post and a shaker rig, or are they the same? Also, what is the cost of each? Well, Ron, it's the same thing. Shaker rig or 7-post rig, those are just little references to the same item. And granted, they weren't always 7 posts. There were 4 posts, and, they've added posts as things are pushed and pulled on the cars while they are being shaken, and the data being driven, replicating what the car is experiencing on a racetrack so that they can look at either damper configurations they've come up with or suspension geometry. And so that's it's the same thing, whether it's a 7-post or a shaker rig, or sometimes it's just called a rig. It's all the same thing. As for costs, I actually reached out to a friend or two. I haven't heard back fully. I do recall a couple years ago, I think it might have been someone at Penske or Ganassi had asked, and they said used ones are definitely, were at least back then, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But then also, as Craig Hampson from the Dale Coyne team rightfully pointed out, it isn't just buying the physical item, the hydraulic rams and the software and everything that does the shaking, Robin. It's having to then pour the big giant cement block that it is all mounted into. And it's hiring, folks who are specialists in running such things. So beyond the equipment itself, there's also some construction work. Hey, maybe that's another thing Mike Harding can do to raise some money. Laying a big old concrete patch to drop that in and secure it on. Then it's also the people, the experts, to run it for you. So I believe Ganassi and Penske are the only teams with their own in-house. I could be wrong if someone else has gotten in on the game, but it's not inexpensive. That is for darn sure. Ron. Let's see. Here's another one. Andrew Neer. And it's either Nier or Neer. And hopefully I didn't destroy your last name too much, Andrew. This is a good one, Robin. We touched on this a little bit, and I didn't want to dive into it there because I wanted to save this for Andrew's question. He said hydroplaning was a big issue for the drivers this weekend. He said we see current spec F1 tires channeling a lot of water. Has Firestone been making any efforts to improve the capabilities of their rain tires? He says, I hate seeing an IndyCar race stopped by the rain when other series can continue. Yeah, there's a couple things we need to parse here, Andrew. And first and foremost is IndyCar in the 2018 configuration on a road course has a big old floor. Well, granted, it's the same floor everywhere we go, but on speedways, there are holes that are opened up, and there's some difference in how they are arranged. But it's a big old floor, lots of surface area, and these cars also run very close to the ground. I know that F1 cars also run close to the ground, but they don't necessarily have the giant floors that the 2018 Indy cars use to make so much underbody downforce. Well, so you take these two things, Robin. You take a car with low ride height and a big old floor, and when you're running over a giant puddle at 100 plus miles an hour, you're just lifting the car up off the ground. It is the liquid, the volume of liquid beneath the car, filling up all the space of that ride height, and essentially causing a situation where the car is surfing. Wheels either off the ground or lifted enough off the ground where they're really not able to make contact, and the driver is able to control the vehicle. That's what we were seeing last weekend when things started to get really bad, Andrew. That is why Will Power spun and crashed. So I'm sure that Firestone can improve their rain tires. Every company can make improvements on something. But the bigger issues that we saw last weekend had nothing to do with tires. It was too much water trapped on the track, and in situations where cars drove over that or went over that water, it just simply lifted them up off the ground. And they were passengers at that point. So, that's something to consider for sure as being part of the reasons why they could not continue. The other thing, Robin, which I don't know if it was mentioned during the broadcast, but we saw during the red flags that the trucks were out and the sweepers were out trying to brush and push all that water off the track into the grass and dirt, and it was just completely packed and filled. So we saw in many cases where the truck would go by, brush everything off, and we would have no rain, no real heavy standing water for about 5 seconds, and then it would all not all I should say, but a lot of it would rush back onto the track. because the sides of the track were so waterlogged, there was no place for it to go. So I think that was another thing for us to consider, that, the water just simply did not have the ability to drain off in some areas, especially on the front straight that we saw. So, Andrew, altogether, I really don't look at Firestone here. I don't think Firestone was the one we should be looking at. This is just Mother Nature making the track unusable. With these cars, again, with the ride height and the floors in question.
Firestone's they're going to have a new rain tire for Detroit. So, again, like we said earlier, they don't have three different compounds. And when you look at all the things that, we've had two rain races. Well, I think the last rain race we had was Toronto, 2015 maybe. It doesn't happen very often. So the expenditure Firestone does is try and make the best tires for racing, and with the alternates and the reds and the blacks, and I think they do a good job. So I don't think very many Formula One cars would have negotiated the monsoon that they had at Barber.
All right, so we're going to hit 3 more questions and then let you back to your day, Mr. Miller, as if I have anything else I'm really doing here, too. But let's see. Let's go with Daniel Kincaid. A little bit of a long question/comment, but fits into what we've discussed a little bit. Daniel says, why couldn't IndyCar run the race Sunday morning right after the Indy Lights race? So we've already kind of discussed that there was a policy in place. But, he said the weather was good enough. Is it even possible to run the race early? And then showed on tape delay. He was there. He said they scanned our tickets as we entered the track, and the majority of us were there by noon. Could they have just refunded those who didn't scan in before the flag dropped and ran the race really early? He says, he sat there in the rain talking with friends, saying as soon as it went yellow, we knew they red flag it because they would lose the track. Just wondering if it's even an option. Again, we've already discussed this a bit, Daniel, but I didn't want to ignore it since you were there at the race. And this points out something, Robin, which I guess I don't know where to place the expectations. So information at the track as a fan, and I'm not just talking Barber, frankly, I'm talking just about anywhere, it can be a hit or miss thing. If you're sitting out in the stands or you're sitting out in the grass and it's raining and you're doing just like you were, Daniel, going, hey, we're all kind of here. The weather is not too bad right now. Why don't we go? That might be something that wasn't a surprise that folks might be thinking. Whether that was something to be conveyed or an answer to be conveyed over the PA system, who knows? While I love the fact, Robin, that folks send in amazing questions every week here, there's a part of me that thinks, maybe it wouldn't be bad for IndyCar, IMSA, whatever, NASCAR, major series, wherever they are racing, if they don't already have a system in place, basically have a live fan Q&A thing, where if you're at the track, you're probably going to have your smartphone with you or your tablet. And if you do have a significant question, not, hey, what's the price of beer, but, something more related to the event that you, would help you, be curious. I don't know if series do have such a thing, but if you're sitting out there and have a real question, it might be cool if there's either a hashtag that a racing series could follow to get right back to you, or an email address that they make readily available in the, event information packet when you get there. But that to me, Daniel, seems like something where if it was something you and others were all asking that question Sunday morning, it would have been cool if you had the ability to ask that to someone in a official capacity and get an answer back without having to walk 2 miles and try and find someone. Just storm into race control, Robin. Maybe that's what we should tell folks. Just open the door, pound on the door, and say, hey, I've got a question. Or maybe not.
Well, the thing that was sad Sunday is that you could see it coming. You knew that we were all sitting there at noon going, look, everybody that cares about this race is already here. It would be great if we could start it. And to Daniel's point, and to your point, if there was some kind of instant message with people could log in and vote and say, okay, we're taking a vote right now of everybody here. You guys want to start this race? In the next 30 minutes, we're going to start at 12:30. Well, I don't think anybody would have a problem with it. I think that'd be phenomenal. That's probably, but because it was no surprise that A, it was going to rain, and B, when it was coming, and we just knew it was going to be bad, and that was sad because they had such a nice crowd on Saturday, and those people that hung in there as long as they did Sunday certainly deserve better than they got.
All right, we are down to the penultimate question. For Robin Miller on the Week in IndyCar on the Marshall Pruett podcast presented by Cooper Tires. This one's going to Michael Wallace, Robin. It says, hey guys, first time asking a question for the Week in IndyCar. Said not to make the sport like F1, but would it be cost effective to only have 2-car teams and have one pit crew for pit stops? Thanks for the podcast. So Michael's wondering how much money we might save if teams were limited to the Formula One model of only 2 entries and a single pit setup for both cars.
I would just, my theory would be the more the merrier, and we had lunch with Trevor Carlin over the weekend about just, what he's taken on in his lifetime and how fired up he is about it. I just like the possibilities that anybody can join, and even a 1-car team like Rahal before this year could still be successful. So, I don't think it's going to make. I don't think it makes the race any better. I don't think it has any bearing on competition. I mean, it's tough enough to feel that it's amazing we have 22 or 23 cars now. How we got there is it still amazes me that Michael Shank and Ricardo Juncos and Trevor Carlin are all here, and we may see George Michael Steinbrenner next year. We may see a couple more teams next year. So I mean, I would hate to see it restricted.
I'll also throw this in, Michael. Keep in mind that while Formula One teams only make use of a single pit crew to change tires, they're 2 fully staffed crews to look after both cars. So when it comes to pit stops, they obviously reduce things down. But, so you don't have both pit crews pitting cars at the same time. But it's not as if they use fewer people at the track. Because they only stop 1 car at a time. If anything, they have about double or triple or quadruple the amount of staff at the track for an F1 program compared to an IndyCar effort. All right, so I've saved this last one for you, Robin, before we welcome in good old Gabby Chavez. This comes in from Jerry Suddeth, who continues to send in great questions each week. Robin, considering you've covered both basketball as well as racing, which racer would have done the best? Which basketball player would have done the best as a pro racer, and which basketball player would have been the best as a driver?
That's a good question. I think Tom Sneevil was probably the best basketball player. He played on a lot of our amateur. We had teams in the leagues for years, and if he was in town, he'd play with us. Tom and Jerry Sneevil were both good basketball players, so they'd be my choices to be. They would represent racing on the basketball floor. Chris Neifel was also real good.
Well, he's also 9'12", so.
Well, yeah, but he was 9'12". Which race drive? And then
I read that. Well, the question. Great question, Jerry. I tried to fix it a little bit and ended up screwing it up. So Jerry asked which racer would have been the best pro basketball player, and which pro basketball player do you think would have been the best racer?
Yeah, I don't know too many pro basketball players that would have been good racers. Maybe Jimmy Rail. He was Mr. Basketball. He went to Indiana. He had a Cobra. He had one of those high-powered Cobra Mustangs, and he somehow managed not to kill himself because he liked going fast. I'm not sure there's anybody I would pick. I think he'd probably be the only guy I could think of that actually liked going fast.
Mr. Miller, it's good having you back on, brother. I mean, again, we started this stupid thing 2 years ago, whatever it was, so or a year. I don't know when we started it. A year ago? I don't know. A year and a half ago, something like that. But A, great to have you back, and B, I think the most valuable thing we've learned today, Robin, 1S, Indy Legend T-shirts Robin.com. Go buy stuff from Robin. He's already racing's wealthiest writer and reporter.
That's quite true.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a big sure, Marshall.
So before we go, tell us how is our boy Anthony Joseph doing? And I also need to send you the artwork from the sticker that we did with you and AJ, so you can turn those into shirts as well.
Well, yeah, that's a wonderful sticker. He's good. He looked good. He had a little drama leaving Houston. Thankfully, Larry Foyt sits in the front seat with the pilot, and as they were taking off out of Houston, a military helicopter somehow got a little off course and was kind of right in their way, and they had to do a little 45-degree bank job to miss him. Larry said it wasn't. AJ said, Jesus, you could see the guy. The pilot for AJ said you could see the guy's arms working pretty fast on the helicopter, so that was closer than he wanted to be. But Larry said, well, it wasn't that close. It wasn't quite that close. So Foyt's dodged death one more time, although that's probably an exaggeration. But every day's an adventure with him. He looks good. He's looking forward to Indy. I think they're really got their hopes up that Kanaan is going to be a factor in Indy, and I think he will be.
You know what I'm looking forward to, and I realize we're just kind of extending the conversation, but it's all right. Y'all don't realize how much Robin and I just waste, how many hours per week we waste talking about absolutely nothing. Here, I'll throw this one at you. So, James Davison, some folks love him, some folks hate him. I love the kid, always have. I think he is going to be a huge addition to the Foyt team in May, and here's why. And we're not picking on our friend Mr. Kanaan by any means, or young Matthias Laced, but Tony has never been known as Mr. Setup. He's never been known as, the guy who's just able to come up with every little miniature tweak to make a car perfect. That's what Eric Cowden's done with Tony for 20-plus years. That's why they make a great combo. Tony gives him his thoughts. Eric goes back, comes up with some really good stuff, and off you go. But again, Tony, reputationally, he's not known as Mr. Setup. Matthias Laced, we know that kid is fast as a bullet. Couldn't tell you if the engine was in the front, the back. I mean, that kid's also not, at least at a place in his early career where he's known as Mr. Setup. I think Davison, who does have a reputation as someone who's really good, has really good feel for a car, can provide some really sharp feedback. I think he's going to be a much bigger help to that team than anyone expects. So, as you mentioned, Tony's going to drive the wheels off the thing. Cowden's going to do a great job. Laced is going to do a great job, and hopefully he stays off the walls. I think Davison, I think that's going to be a sleeper contributor to all these month of May one-offs. I really do think that kid's going to help raise Foyt's overall game instead of just being kind of the tack-on third entry that, is just here for the sake of being here.
Well, yeah, if he's half as fast as he was last May, he certainly will be.
So, there you go. All right, Miller. Well, what are you doing for the rest of the day? I'm
going to try and clean my house. Sorry, condo. It shouldn't take long. It's only 41 square feet. Actually, Trevor Carlin's, the place that he hosted our luncheon the other day, was 5 times bigger and nicer than my condo. That was kind of embarrassing, but that's okay.
Well, hopefully you got some new fuel for the flamethrower, so the cleaning process won't take too long. And I will have hopefully my final doctor's appointment today. And although I'm still going to be on pretty solid meds for another couple of weeks, maybe even the month of May, I'm hoping she's going to give me the all clear to get on a plane Sunday morning and head out to Indianapolis for 3 days of testing. And then I will hang out a little bit on Thursday and drive over to Mid-Ohio for the IMSA race. So hoping to get the all clear for that. And if I do, you and I are going to go and terrorize some IndyCar drivers and teams at the Speedway.
Sounds like a plan, brother.
All right, my friend. Thank you. And let's welcome in our boy, Gabby Chavez. All right, Mr. Chavez. So, we try and maintain some standards here on the Week in IndyCar presented by Cooper Tires. We normally don't go for guests who finished a race 2 laps down, but in your case, we're going to make an exception. All right, all kidding aside, I know after that video that a couple folks captured after the race, which we'll get to in a minute, but I know that when I reached out and said, hey, man, it'd be fun to have you on again, and you said, all right, but I want to clear the air a little bit here, set the record straight. So, kidding aside about you being 2 laps down, tell us about the inaccuracy that might have come out during the argument with you and Simon Pagenaud.
Yeah, man, thanks. I appreciate it, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to come on here with you guys and kind of set some of the facts that were misinterpreted. So I'll begin with at the time when Simon felt that I was holding him up. I was only a lap down from the leader, and I was not a lap down from Simon. So he was completely wrong in saying that I was 2 laps down. I was not at the time. I did end up 2 laps down because, well, we pitted about 3 times when the rain started falling, and we went out on slicks, then had to come back in for rains 2 laps later, and of course you lose a lot of time that way. But I think a lot of his anger and frustration was that either he was misinformed by his team or he just thought differently, but he thought he was 2 laps down. I can totally understand his frustration with that, but I mean, the fact is that I was not, and actually was being pretty polite to everyone else who was quicker than me at that time, who was on that lead lap, and that's why I never felt like I was holding him up. The moment that he got within a cart length of my gearbox, I moved over and I let him by, just like I did with Dixon, Sato, Rahal, and all those guys that were fighting for position. And he's saying that I cost him a top 5 finish. I mean, can you imagine if he's got trouble going around a car that's a lap down? He thinks he could have gotten top 5 and go around Dixon and Sato and Rahal and all those guys a lot easier than me. I don't think so. So I think he's a bit frustrated that he's not performing like his teammates are, and I think he got that frustration, looked for a guy to kick, and it was an easy decision for him to come up to me and kick the underdogs. Which at that point I'm all for a conversation, but the way he approached me just wasn't the right one. So I fired back.
I haven't had a chance to speak with Simon yet, so there's some assumptions made there, and I would push back if I knew that they were different, but at this point, I don't want to say I'm in the middle of anything, but I do hope to speak to Simon here and just get his general thoughts. Granted, I mean, as I mentioned with Robin Miller earlier, no disrespect to you or Simon, but, this is the equivalent of a pillow fight. There were no punches thrown. These are words being used. We're not swinging baseball bats at each other, so there was some civility. Tell me about your reaction to this. And I'll maybe quickly throw in, when I reached out and said I wanted to have you on, this is obviously a hot topic to discuss, but you also had a pretty tough race. And I thought that was the one thing that really wasn't explored too much coming out of Barber. So that's the thing I want to get into a little bit more in depth in a moment, but this is clearly the thing that I've read folks on both sides of the argument, Gabby. One was, first of all, many people misspelling your last name, spelling it with a Z instead of an S at the end. But, that punk needs to learn respect. And, when a champion's trying to go by, get out of the way. There were others that said, hell yeah, Gabby, don't let anybody push you around. I think what I saw, tell me if I'm right or wrong, but, the team you drive for, more of a blue-collar team, This wasn't Roger Penske. This wasn't one of the more buttoned-up, quiet teams. Again, a little more blue-collar. I didn't see anyone pulling you back from your team or telling you to be quiet. Seems like, everyone had your back. Do you think that kind of comfort just let you say what you had to say and do what you had to do without worrying if you're going to get, fined by your team owner or something else?
I don't know. I mean, I think, kind of to to get back to the first topic, which was about the race itself and the race weekend. Yeah, we had a rough weekend. I mean, we'll go back to the beginning of the month or whenever we were testing at Barber for the one day, which we did 3 laps. We blew an engine, so we couldn't get the test day in. We come back, and in I believe it's the first session, we blew an engine again in the race weekend, and then obviously repaired it, or it was maybe the second session, I'm not sure. And anyway, we came back out, had overheating issues, so we probably did about 10 laps before qualifying. So that in itself was really rough, right, to get going. Obviously, we go out in qualifying, we're trying to improve, the red flag comes out, you don't get the lap you think you can get, and it just kind of starts to snowball, right? It's the snowball effect. And at the end of the day, it is what it is. I think we were making some sort of progress, and, however you can quantify that or not. And then you get to a race where for, issues we had to pit early. However, that puts us in an alternate strategy, which sometimes works out, sometimes it doesn't. And I think just, with the resetting of the fueling overnight, then we're completely starting, not only the disadvantage, but now we're a lap down too on the restart to the race, which is a bit unfair, but it's the ruling it is. So you have to do whatever you can to just make the best of it. And then during the race, I thought our pace was pretty decent. I mean, we were within half second of the fastest lap of the leaders, and we were kind of keeping pace with a lot of the guys in the top 10. And, if anyone pressured me, I would get out of the way. And so I thought we were having a decent race in probably the worst circumstances that we could have asked for.
Yeah.
So it just kind of, it was a rough week, and obviously everyone is trying to improve. And, we in our pre-race meeting, we sat down and we discussed how we're going to deal, with the traffic. And the rule that we, kind of what we all agree on is if we're going to hold someone up, we got to let them by, right? But if we're not holding anyone up, we got to try to get our lap back. And like I said, at the point that this whole thing with Simon started, we were only a lap down from the leader. We had him in sight. He was a straightaway in front of us. If a yellow falls right that lap, we get our lap back and we're back on the lead lap. So I understand, like I said, I have huge respect for the guy, right? He's a champion. He's a veteran. He's a great guy off and on the track. But I think he had his facts a little backward. He thought I was 2 laps down, which I was not. I wasn't even a lap down to him at that point. So I understand his frustration, but sometimes people got to chill out a little bit and do their research before they start assuming things.
So we had someone suggest that we needed to get some Go F Yourself Gabby t-shirts going on. I don't know if you're in support of those. Those might be a little bit hard to get on TV, but
that's not the right quote. It was get the F out of here.
All right. Okay. I might have misremembered that one. I don't want to make too much of this. Look, and I'm not, blowing smoke here. You're one of the supremely good guys in the paddock. Simon is one of the supremely good guys in the paddock, right? It's not like you two are both, dickheads and just known for being bad people, and 2 bad people came together and barked at each other. So it was a little bit strange to see 2 of the nicer, warmer folks in the paddock clashing. What's that like, though? Right? Obviously, Simon, Team Penske, champion, front runner type guy. And I'm not, just trying to make a distinction between your career past, but I'm looking at him walking down as a highly promoted Team Penske driver. You're a guy who is trying to take a brand new team and build that into something that can hopefully challenge Simon for championships one day. Was there any sense of like, come on, man, you're coming down here and laying it on a little bit hard on one of the smaller teams? Or I'm not sure what it was, but I appreciated the fact that you weren't willing to lay down. And if anything, I think you showed folks that, I don't care whether I am 5'5" or 10'5", I'm not backing down if you get in my face.
Well, I'll tell you what, if 10 years of jiu-jitsu say anything here, I put my money on myself, right? I wouldn't bet against it. So that, I've never said that. A lot of people don't know what I do in my off time, right? But I wouldn't bet against myself in that one, which, all joking aside, like I said, I have huge respect for, a lot of the guys in the paddock, one of them being Simon Pagenaud, right? I understand the guy's frustrated, and I think his frustration was just misplaced, right? Either because he had the wrong facts or just because things aren't going his way compared to his teammates. I don't know where the frustration is coming from, but it was just misplaced, and he was looking for a way to get it out or someone to blame for that, right? And he picked the wrong guy, man. I'm not, I'm not going to deal with that either. We got our own things to worry about. We got to, see how we improve our program, and being picked on is just not the way to do it. So we're not going to stand it. And I'm pretty sure everyone saw that. Everyone in my team felt the same way, as no one interrupted.
Jiu-jitsu battle on pit lane. I am so down with that. I want to see some hip tosses and all kinds of good stuff here. All right, well, let's move on to the other thing that I really wanted to delve into, because I think, you epitomize the guy who was, just seemingly being faced with every issue possible, whether it was your visor fogging up and not being able to see, having to pit, to have that addressed, to things spiraled in an unfortunate direction for you pretty quickly in the race once it started to rain on Sunday. Gabby, tell our listeners a little bit about what that's like, where rain's getting heavier. Obviously, we need to move on to be on wets, but we're aquaplaning, vision's a problem. The spray coming up is making it nearly impossible to see. It's one thing to listen to Newgarden or a Bourdais or someone who's, up front in the top 2 or 3 cars talk about it being a challenge. What's it like when you're having a fight from behind? I have to imagine this was one of the more brutal weekends you've had to contend with.
Yeah, it gets really tough once you're, probably 5 cars back in line. Let's not even talk about being, behind 15 or 18 cars or whatever it is, right? So, I mean, it's really tough. You can't even see, the steering wheel in front of you when you're on a straightaway or behind other cars. So, with that aside, though, I think the issue we had was my visor was fogging up, and it was latched on. It was a brand new visor, and it was latched on, and I couldn't get it open, because usually you can just crack it open and that'll get some airflow, and I think that's what everyone was dealing with, right? It fogs up, you crack it open, and you get some airflow back in it. It's not ideal, but it's a lot better than what I was dealing, where I almost couldn't see the pit lane. I couldn't see where to pit. I couldn't see my guys. One more lap, and I would have crashed, or I would have had to stop on track. So it was just a really, really bad situation all around. I feel like I should have maybe done a little bit better job making sure that the visor was properly placed and all that. On the other hand, it's kind of just a bad luck thing, right? And it just wasn't our weekend. But I think with all that, we can still learn things. We can still keep that progression, keep the positive attitude that we know we have, and we know we can achieve good things together. So, we'll try to forget here the bad stuff. We'll try to focus on the good things that we learned and kind of reset and get ready for the most important month of the year.
It's really interesting to hear about all the motor problems and overheating problems you had. I mean, it sounds like that was... it's strange when such a thing strikes a single entry multiple times in a short time span. Let's move over to questions here, Gabby. And I mentioned earlier with Robin, but one of the cool things is our friends at TorontoMotorsports.com give away some Marshall Pruett swag, either T-shirts or mug, to favorite questions. And I'm already seeing here I'm going to have a tough time next week picking my favorite. Let's open with Kevin Frederico, who says, "Hey, Gabby, how's the team gelling as the races go by?" And maybe we'll throw in the fact that there have been a couple more additions to the team since you left Long Beach and got to Barber. So how's that coming along, even with new folks jumping on board?
I think it's great. I think every weekend, every day that goes by at the shop or the race weekend, we get to know each other more and more. We feel more comfortable, in each other's presence. We work together better, and we have some more additions, like you said. So obviously, it'll take a bit of time to get those implemented and working in the best way that we can maximize everyone's kind of strengths for that. So, the results from those additions, they won't show straight away, but I think it's adding depth to our whole team and just making it stronger and really setting us up for what we believe we can do, which is, be successful, be a top-tier IndyCar team. And, we understand there's growing pains involved. We've seen them, right? We've experienced it. The last 3 weeks have been hell. But, these guys, they wake up every day with a smile on their face. They go to sleep every night, with a smile on their face and just thinking, how can we make this better? Where can we improve? And I think that's the right attitude. I think that's, I look up to these guys for that, for kind of sticking with it, no matter, if we have bad luck or if we just don't have the pace that we need to have. These guys are in it all the way, and, I'm in it with them too. So I'm really, really happy with the team, the way it's coming together. And I think we can kind of forget, what's happened now and really, really reset and start turning this season around and growing the way we know we can.
I'll throw in there quickly, and I realize teams are a little bit different, but, Harding Racing, Indy 500 debut last year, a couple races. This season, 2018, your first full-time effort. If we look back at arcs and timelines, I worked for Sam Schmidt back when it was SSM, Sam Schmidt Motorsports. Their first year in what was then the Indy Racing League in 2001 was actually my last year working on the crew side, or team side. And, Sam debuted in 2001 as a team owner, full season there, full season 2002. Then really from 2003 through 10 became more or less an Indy-only entrant. Made a full-time return in 2011 when they picked up the fast racing team FAZZT with Alex Tagliani and Dan Weldon and spin into a few cars. But I would say if you really look at the modern version of Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports, what was then, Schmidt-Hamilton Motorsports, 2012 was really the first time they said, okay, we're going to put together a proper full-season entry with one person, and that was with Simon Pagenaud. And so I look, again, I realize there's a much longer history than 2012, but I really do see that team start around 2011, 2012 with very good people, very good driver, and within a couple years, Simon was fifth in his rookie year with the team. They were third the following year in 2013. In a short amount of time, we saw that the Schmidt team was capable of rising up and being a very competitive effort. I think it might have been a little easier back then. I don't think all the teams were as good as they are today, but I do look at them, Gabby, as a little bit of a roadmap to say, if you do surround yourself with the right people, you hire a Vince Kramer to help with managing, you hire a Gerald Tyler, as you've just done, as technical director to fortify the engineering effort. I look at what a small one-car team was capable of doing back then with Schmidt and a very good driver and good infrastructure and see that, we're not expecting fireworks your first year, but there is proof that year 2, year 3, you guys can start to be a real problem for other teams. So I think that is encouraging for sure. And we just found another way to work Simon Pagenaud into the conversation. Let's see. Sean Olmstead. I like this one. This question is for all. If you could pick one road course race on the current schedule to have it as a night race, which would it be and why?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I think a place like Road America would be really something at night. I mean, if you could imagine, if they could actually, get the whole track lit up, all 4 miles or whatever it is of it, and if you could imagine doing the carousel ride at 140 flat out, at night, under the lights, and that would be something, wouldn't it?
There's a part of me that wonders, I know it's been spoken about before, but the Indy Grand Prix, we run the road course there. Obviously, the Indy 500 is sacred. We don't want to touch that. But if we're going to put on a party and we want to try and do that, on a Saturday or Saturday night, sounds like it might be a lot of fun. So, bring in some bands, make sure there's a lot of fun there. That stands out to me as just amplifying an event that I think drivers enjoy, but it's always lacked that little bit of something like, wow, this is amazing. So I don't know if going to nighttime would do it there, but that sounds like it could be fun. Long Beach, I think that could be a blast. And there's also part of me that thinks Sonoma. Sonoma is just another race that has always needed that little extra something. Part of me wonders if it was a night race, if that could be amplified a bit for fans to come out and enjoy. All right, well, this one is from J.D. Ellis, and it's more of an etiquette question than rehashing the thing directly with you and Simon. He said, what's the timeline or sequence of events between having a disagreement with a competitor in the heat of the moment and getting to the next test or race or series function? So I think it's more of a question of, is this something where you think in general, if two guys have a heated disagreement, you kind of make a mental note, well, when I see that guy at the next race or the driver's meeting, I'll pull him aside? Do you pick up the phone between races? What's the general way of going about these things, do you think?
I don't know, because I'm usually not involved in them. So it's new territory for me. But I would imagine that we're both smart enough to understand that, this is kind of a heat of the moment thing that happens. And like I said, and I'll say it again, I've got huge respect for the guy. And I just think that his frustration and facts were misinformed and misplaced. And if he can kind of go back and think about, what actually transpired and, the actual facts of what was going on and who was on what lap and whatnot, I think that maybe he would have probably not gone to my pit box.
What's the update here? This also coming from JD Ellis. We spoke about this not too long ago when you were on, but any updates on when you're going to get back into driving a midget or a sprint car or something? Have you had a chance to put something on your dirt racing calendar yet?
I'd love to. I always say I'd love to, but I haven't. No, not at this moment. I haven't really thought about it much. I know there was a small effort into maybe doing the Chili Bowl earlier this year. That didn't happen, obviously. But hopefully something we can revisit again for next year.
Ben Tyler asks, Gabby, what track do you most want to drive on that you've never driven on? And not necessarily a race, but just some solo time to enjoy.
Yeah, to me it's the Nürburgring, the Nordschleife, the full track. That one is one that I spend a lot of time on my free time, just in simulators, just pounding laps away. I just love that track.
All right, well, we know who to blame for the inspiration on this question. Justin Brockwell asks, and I'm glad that he's put in brackets for Gabby, because if you'd asked it of me, it would be really strange to answer. Have you ever peed yourself during an IndyCar Indy Lights race? Thanks a million to James Hinchcliffe for shining that spotlight on this aspect of motor racing. I don't know if you caught that Sunday night, if you caught any of the NBCSN broadcast after the race, but Hinch, for reasons we're still trying to figure out, admitted to the world that he did indeed let his own puddle build inside the cockpit during Sunday.
That's a good question, man. And the answer is when you gotta go, you gotta go.
Well, I think that's a good non-confirmation confirmation, so we're going to leave that where that is,
there
Justin.
You go.
Let's see. Yeah, it's a good one as well. Ben Cohen says, what are the challenges? I'm having a problem with my new tongue today, Gabby. My apologies. What are the challenges or constraints for a driver and even team members for a race that is delayed and even postponed, such as Barber was? And after you answer, I'll share some thoughts on that as well.
I mean, it's hard to speak for every team and every driver. I think, put it into my perspective, at least, right, which is, you get out of the car, you get the confirmation that, hey, we're postponing this, and then you're thinking, well, hey, our fuel advantage that we had, specifically talking about Barber, is completely gone now. And if they do restart this and let everyone refuel and reset, we are now a lap down in a track that usually doesn't really have any yellow flags or any cautions, I should say. So that's kind of it's a little scary. So it's a bit frustrating. But I think usually you just kind of wait and wait for the updates from race control and kind of see what their thoughts are, how they're going to go about the situation, and then you just have to be dynamic and flexible, and you adjust the best you can. Whether it be delayed race or postponed for another date or whatever, you just try to do the best you can as a team to make the most of whatever your situation is at that moment.
My first Indy 500 was 1997, which some might remember was, I think it took us 3 days, 3 attempts. I think we ended up getting it in on Tuesday, where it was just rain delay after rain delay. And I'll tell you, Ben, the real challenge that I found, and it wasn't the first time I've been in a rain delay. I remember, I think the 96 Detroit Indy Lights race. We had massive downpours where we raced Sunday morning before the IndyCar race, and it rained so heavily and took long enough for that to clear that our race got moved to after the IndyCar race. So it was just, weird, but whether it's a one-day or multiple-day delay or being pushed many hours later into the afternoon, I'd say the really weird thing, Ben, and Gabby, you might agree, but whether you are a driver or a mechanic or an engineer, whatever it is, each day at the track is very regimented. You have a schedule, not only of when the cars go on track, but each team has its own schedule, leaving the hotel at this time, getting to the track at this time, where tech is at this time. All the variety of things that you have. You go into every weekend, Gabby, with your day is more or less completely planned out, even your breaks. And it's a little bit strange, Ben, when you go from this highly regimented, I'm planning for this, I'm prepping for that, this is tomorrow, I need to get this thing in motion, etc., to all of a sudden just being floating. Kind of in the abyss of like, okay, this is weird. I'm at the track, we're not racing, we've kind of cleaned up the car, dried it off, whatever we've done, but to go from having a very highly regimented every minute of the day to, I don't know, a complete lack of structure. Should I take a nap? I'm tired, but if I do that, will everyone else make fun of me or draw stuff on my face? It's weird to just be there without real structure. So, at least for me, that's what those experiences were like. Just a little bit strange.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Of course, I was talking more on the performance side, but absolutely, as far as kind of, we're creatures of habit, right? You get into the habit of following a schedule and just doing things when you have to do them, and now all of a sudden it's like, well, now what? So
yeah.
You feel out of place, you feel off balance, and yeah, it is weird.
All right, let's get through a few more here on Facebook, Gabby, then we'll jump over to Twitter questions, and then we are going to bid farewell to this week's episode. Keith Lee had a question. Robin and I got into a little bit talking about how your Harding team is coming together, and the big remaining question was one of sponsorship. And we both said that, it's awesome to see someone like Mike Harding willing to invest freely and build up this great team, but you're always afraid if sponsors don't start, coming on board sooner than later. So Keith was asking just how that's coming along, if there's any whispers of potential for bigger sponsors coming in, and he also asks if you're holding out for one big sponsor, or if trying to fill that void with a group of smaller sponsors might be the other approach to take.
I think we're open to both approaches, really. There's there's ongoing conversations with a lot of potential partners here. Obviously, nothing has come through yet, but we're optimistic that it will. You know, with the way that IndyCar kind of structures the sponsorship programs, I think we've got a really good way of tying that into Harding Racing, and that's really because, you know, we've got Harding Group as the parent company, you know, and they've got several companies there, right? It's not only paving and asphalt. They've got a trucking company. They've got a, you know, home decoration and a bunch of other stuff. So a lot of the time it's just a business-to-business deal, and, you know, trying to get something that benefits both parties or even a third party involved, and all of a sudden you've got sponsorship, but no one is spending really any money, and everyone's making money. So it kind of works out great, and I think that's something that you know, Harding Racing, Harding Group can really offer its potential partners. So I think that's the angle that we're really trying to work on. And I think just because we're so relatively new, you know, it's just taking a little bit of time, but I think once it gets going, it should be pretty good.
Is Mike trying to put you to work, you know, on the home decor side or the trucking side? I'm just trying to figure out, you know, how much work he's trying to get out of you here outside the race car.
I'll do it all. You know, I'll do it all. I'm a flexible guy.
I love it. All right, let's move on to a couple more here. Here we go. There are a couple folks who've asked questions about tires in general, the rain tires, over the weekend, since this was the first time everyone has run in the wet with the new Aero kit. Corey Matthews will say it's good to discuss the difference between running a wet setup with rain tires and having to load or go race with a dry setup. Curious if you can share some thoughts on how you felt the Firestone wets performed, and then maybe you can also speak on going out with, call it a partial or full rain setup, and then having to bolt on slicks when it's dry and deal with a car that maybe isn't perfectly set up for those conditions.
Yeah, it's always a bit of a give and take situation, right? I mean, I'd say most of the time, if you've got a pretty well balanced car in the dry, you shouldn't really have to do much to get it working well in the wet. But if you've got a bit of an imbalance, it could make, you know, an okay dry handling car pretty evil in the rain fairly quickly. So it just depends on how you feel that where you're at with your car setup and your balance and all that. And then as far as the tire go, I mean, I think the tire did well. I'm skeptical of calling it a full rain tire. I think it's closer to an intermediate tread style that you'd find more like in a sports tire for a road car, where it kind of handles, you know, every condition pretty decent, but not one condition very well. So when we started the first part of the race on Sunday, and we've got, you know, rivers and lakes running across the track, well, it's not ideally what this tire was meant to do. So it was, I'm sure everyone saw on one of the restarts, you've got guys completely sideways on the straightaway. So that's not something you really are looking forward to. And I think closer to how the race ended on the Monday at the end, when rain was falling pretty hard, the track's pretty wet all around, but there's no standing water. I think the tire performed pretty well.
David Pequeen, and I hope I didn't murder your last name, David. Please tell me if I did. He says, Gabby, you've started 3 Indy 500s. In each one, you've started outside the top 20, but finished inside the top 20 twice. He said you've improved over your starting position in all 3. He says, this May, do you want to put more focus on qualifying to have a better starting spot for race day? Or would you rather just spend all your practice time in race trim?
I guess it'll depend. We've got 2 test days coming up at the Speedway next week, so it'll really depend where we think we're at in, you know, speed wise. If we feel we're competitive and we're comfortable, we'd probably spend a bit more time working on the race car. because, if you've got a good race car, you can just trim it out, have a few trim steps, and you should be a pretty good qualifying car with that. So it'll just depend. If we feel like we're lacking a little bit of pace, certainly we'll focus more on getting that ultimate speed per lap. But honestly, I think we should be all right. If we, like last year, I thought we had a pretty decent car. We should have qualified a lot better than we did. We had an issue in qualifying that didn't really show our true qualifying speed, and we kind of drove forward in the race. So I think we had a pretty decent car. We started with somewhere close to how we raced, and last year we should be pretty good. Obviously, we got a completely different aero kit this year. And then also the other thing that we got to consider is, I think it was kind of obvious last year that one of the engine manufacturers had a power advantage, and I believe, I hope that most of that, if not all of it, is gone for this year. So we should be right out of the bat just more competitive than we were last year, just in just looking at that.
Todd Michaels, this might be the best short question we've ever gotten on the Week in IndyCar, presented by Cooper Tires. Gabby, what's your favorite word that rhymes with duck? Should I suggest truck in light of one of Harding's businesses? Is that the family-friendly direction we should go, my young friend?
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's what first came to mind.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I guess you spelled truck with a letter F, but that's okay. All right, we're going to move on here. Greg Liver's Edge says, good question. Thanks for asking this, Greg. In one regard, the Mazda Road to Indy is working great. It's produced strong teams and drivers that have been able to move up and be successful at the top level. On the other side, Indy Lights continues to struggle with low car counts. Why hasn't there been more effort put into place to get more teams to cross over from the big cars, IndyCar, down to the light ranks? And he says in NASCAR, there's a value because of the shared tire compounds and data that can be gained. He said IndyCar needs to look at something similar. He sends us into the podcast presented by Cooper Tires, of course, the official tire provider of the Indy Light Series. Thanks, Greg. Has there been any discussion of using a shared chassis in the lower formulas, swapping engines at different levels to promote teams to move up to Indy Lights? I know you can speak on this as well, Gabby. I would throw a couple things in here, Greg, since this is also, I've been either working in or covering Mazda Road to Indy type stuff since the 80s. There was a time where, a common chassis was being discussed so that Indy Lights teams could buy their car and use that same tub and some components and have those be identical to the top-tier IndyCar chassis. That obviously didn't happen when the Dallara IL-15 came out in 2015, but I can tell you that while you might look at the 8 cars that started the races last weekend in Barber in Indy Lights and say there hasn't been effort put in trying to get more teams to cross over, I wouldn't say that's accurate. I know the folks from Anderson Promotions, Dan Anderson, good man who runs all 3 tiers of the Mazda Road to Indy. He's been pushing like heck to get either current team owners to run more cars, more drivers, for IndyCar team owners to add cars. It's just in a bit of a weird place right now, Gabby, where we had a whole bunch of drivers move up from Indy Lights at the end of 2017. We've had Juncos, really, they have expanded into IndyCar. Carlin has moved out of Lights and up to IndyCar, so it's not as if the numbers were huge last year, but we have seen what it's like when you get a big graduating class plus a couple of teams focusing more heavily on the big show that it can knock the numbers down. Do you think this is just something we need to write off as a one-year oddity? Or are you afraid that we might be struggling for car counts next year and the year after as well?
I hope it's an oddity, but, to be honest, I think I think it's almost, maybe it's time for a little bit of a tactics change and changing the formula a little bit, because you kind of see it, the car count's been kind of slowly decreasing, and obviously I think a little bit of it was we had so much crossover from Indy Lights to IndyCar from last year to this year that it really affected the field size. But if we're honest, the Indy Lights field hasn't been healthy in, I don't know, 10 years?
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while.
Maybe more closer to 7 or 8 years, but it's been a while since we've had a 20+ car field. So what the answer is to fixing that, I really don't know. My humble opinion is that Indy Lights is too expensive to run nowadays. When I ran Indy Lights, it was you could do an entire season between probably $500,000 and $700,000 with a top tier team. And nowadays you're looking at a minimum of, I think it's 1.2 is what the teams have to almost spend just to break even. So it's just tough. I don't know why, it's heading in the direction of being more expensive. I think it shouldn't. And it's obviously pushing away some potential young drivers and potential new team owners that want to get into the series.
I think I've mentioned this before on our podcast. There was a time I worked in Indy Lights for quite a few years in the 90s, and I know that our budget, I think 96, for example, we had a 2-car team, and a good team. Both drivers won races. We didn't win the championship, but we were, front-running contenders. And I recall the budgets were somewhere between about $900,000 to 1.1 maybe per entry. And this is 1996. This is 22 years ago. And back then, at least, we would change cars, brand new cars, every 3, 5, 4 years, something like that. So there were new car purchases required on a somewhat regular basis. So that's one of the things that I just find a little interesting, that, we're talking over 20 years ago. The budgets weren't too far from what they are now. Just seems that we were struggling to find the volume. And back then there were 18 to 20 plus car grids. We are struggling to find the folks with that amount of money to spend. So while the number hasn't maybe changed that much, from back then, it just seems like there aren't as many people with it to spend. The other thing I'll mention too, which is you're spot on with, Gabby, I need to do a little bit more digging on this, but I have heard from one team owner through a colleague of mine who said there's something like 15 components on an Indy Lights car that cost more than the same components on an Indy car. And provided that's accurate, and I still need to chase that down a little bit, but it came from a fairly impeccable source of a team owner. If that's the case, man, I'm struggling to think of anything on a junior open wheel car that should cost more than something in the top tier in IndyCar. So I know costs is certainly, that's the number one thing that's been cited. We know the cars are awesome. We know that we've heard from Matthias Laced and others, Zach Veach, that wow, this 2018 Aero kit, there's more in common driving style-wise with the current Indy Lights car than ever with the IndyCar. So if you want to become a great IndyCar driver, come over here and learn in an Indy Lights car. But all that stuff aside, it definitely seems like dollars and cents are still the sticking point right now. All right, let's jump into a few more questions here, my friend, and then we are going to set sail on this episode. Glenn Locke says, for Gabby, what the heck happened with you and Simon Pagenaud? We have no idea what you're talking about, Glenn. No clue whatsoever. I'm going to revisit something, Gabby, that Robin and I got into, a question from Ron Thompson about the price of shaker rigs, because between my call with Robin and our call, one of my engineering friends responded and said, at least with some of the recent pricing he's done, a brand new 7-post shaker rig, just the device itself, not the personnel, not the construction work with laying the pad for it to go into. He said somewhere in the $1.1 to $1.3 million range. So you need to win Indy so you guys can have your own 7-post, by the way, Gab. Let's see. What other questions do we have while I pick up our cat Rocky and toss him off of the desk? All right, Jordan Darwin. Any good Al Unser Jr. stories? If you have to go somewhere with him, who drives? So you got that question last time, but I think this is telling us, Gabby, folks really love Al Unser Jr. and want to hear any stories you can share that wouldn't get one or the two of you arrested.
Like I said last time, my answer stands the same.
Oh, man.
Yes, many stories, none that I can share to the public.
Oh, that is.
I can tell you this though. I think he was a lot happier about the way we kind of reacted to the confrontation at the end of the race. I think that's the happiest I've seen him. In the last 3 weekends that we've had a kind of a rough time. So he was smiling about that at least.
He's a scrappy guy. I don't care how old he gets or whatever. I mean, Al Unser Jr., well, the entire Unser family, but little Al, scrappy guy. One of the many reasons we love him. All right, we're going to go to Ryan Bauer for our last question on Facebook before jumping over to Twitter. He says, if you had a team for the 500 or drivers without a ride, who'd you guys pick for your drivers? He said he would have to go with Kyle Larson and Juan Pablo Montoya. I'm guessing that if Mike Harding came to you and said, hey, just got a sponsor for the 500, we're going to run the second car, I don't know. Between those two, I think I know which one you'd choose between Larson and JPM, but would you go to either one of them? Or is there someone else you'd say, all right, this is my pick for my teammate for the month of May?
No, I mean, yeah, hands down, go with Juan. I mean, not only because of his, 2 out of 4 wins at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But, because I know him more on a personal level off the track as well. So I know that he's never gonna bullshit me in any way or the team. So he's always just trying to drive forward and go as fast as he can. And, it's refreshing to work with a person like that, right? When nowadays you're dealing with a lot of different kind of personalities in the paddock, and it's nice and refreshing to work with someone who's just straight up forward and honest about everything.
I would actually contribute to the fun to get Montoya in the field because he's just so much dang fun. Off the track. We love that guy. We miss him. We miss him, although I get to see him with the sports car races I cover. So that's a little slice of heaven with our boy there. All right, let's jump over to Twitter here. A couple more questions. And our friend Carlos Villalobos also asked for your thoughts on rain tires, so we did get a chance to cover that already. Brandon Smith asks, how do IndyCar teams get their weather information? Do they have their own provider, like a contracted meteorologist, or do they just assign a team member to watch the radar? Does IndyCar provide a service to all the teams? You've kind of hit upon a lot of options here, which I think they're all correct, and the answer is yes to all of them because it depends from team to team. What about you guys, Gabby? Do you know what you guys do to get your weather information for not only what happened last weekend, but every weekend?
Yeah, I think all of us are kind of looking at the radar consistently and just trying to predict what's going to happen. I believe maybe 1 or 2 members of our team have some sort of paid subscription to some weather service that's usually a bit more accurate and can predict more of a minute by minute type of deal. And we might use that more in the case of trying to get ahead of the game, and if we need to pit a lot earlier or something like that for rain tires or something like that. But we haven't really been in that situation yet.
I think the old hold up your index finger and see what you feel, that's also always a very good method of tracking the weather. Let's see. We'll scroll down here a little bit. Forrest Lanier, thanks for this, man. I love the more technical questions that come in because I get to answer those. It says, after the new chassis comes out in 2021 or 22, any chance IndyCar allows teams to buy a chassis from, say, any one of 3 or 4 approved manufacturers like they do in sports car racing with LMP2 chassis come 2025 or 2026? He says he would love to get some car variety back, but yes, I know it's a long way off. I haven't heard a thing about that, Forrest. I also think, and I'm going to sit down with Jay Fry next week when I'm in Indianapolis after the test just to spitball a lot of different things. I think the ship has sailed a little bit on IndyCar being a diverse series when it comes to chassis and tires and many things. I'm not saying it couldn't change, but I think it's been the norm for so long that most people just don't think in those terms. What's it like for you, Gabby? Because I have to realize, or I hate to realize that your time in Indy Lights, you drove one car. There was one chassis. Your time in IndyCar, I believe, unless I'm forgetting something, but I believe you've only ever driven a Dallara DW12. Obviously, there's been different bodywork put on it, but you're the perfect representation, I believe, of a young, IndyCar driver, open wheel driver in North America who's really just been in spec cars all along. Is that fair to say? And do you think that's also just kind of culture-wise where you think we're going to end up sticking in the future?
Yeah, that's very fair to say. And I mean, I think at least in the foreseeable future, I don't think it's going to change much. Right now it's just kind of, it's a formula that's a bit more sustainable and makes kind of every team owner and driver have a chance of being competitive a bit more. So it just seems that for now it's kind of working. Obviously, I'd welcome a bit more diversity within the series. That would be fun, but I wouldn't know what it's like. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I haven't really been in a series where you're kind of more on a factory level than a spec level.
All right, we're going to get to our last couple of questions here. John Sable asked a question, and John, I don't have a really good answer for this yet, so I'll have to try and chase it down if it doesn't fall out of my brain as something to do. He asked, how are race start times determined? He said, good chance a 1 p.m. local start Sunday would have gotten the race in. He says, does NBC push for later start times as they have a NASCAR? Also, could the 2-hour race limit go away next year with just NBC? It seems short. Again, I don't know. I do know that obviously part of this, and we all know that TV is a huge portion of the decision-making process. And if they have long-standing contracts with, whether it's some sort of soccer league or whatever else that has live events, we know that there is a bit of bouncing around that goes on with when IndyCar races do start. But also, to your point, John, if we are going to have almost half of next year's races on the network itself instead of cable, who knows? I don't have a strong answer to that, though. I would say that the 2-hour time limit probably wouldn't go away. If anything, it would be a hard number for the standard races on NBC and NBCSN, unless it is one of the super speedways where we're trying to knock down 500 miles. So don't have a proper answer for that, John, but thank you for sending it in and helping me reveal that I should know more than I do. All right, 3 questions to go, Gab. You can pick one current Indy Lights driver to be your teammate next year. Who do you choose? That comes in from Tanner Miller.
That's a good question, and a bit tough one too, right? Because I wouldn't want to discredit anyone in the Indy Lights field.
But you say nasty things about him off, when we aren't recording. I'm just kidding. Sorry about that.
No, I mean, right now there's 3 guys that stand out to me, right? And one of them is Pato O'Ward, Santi Urrutia, and Colton Herta, right? I think those are the 3 main guys to look out for this year, as far as the ones that can probably jump into an IndyCar here sooner rather than later. So hard to pick one of those out of the bunch, but
let me throw this at you then. We should be talking about a 4th in Aaron Telitz, and I do believe he would be capable. We just both know that he has had possibly the most miserable start to an Indy Lights season ever of any driver. And we also have seen that Pato O'Ward, this hasn't surprised me because we've seen this kid do some crazy things in Pro Mazda and also in IMSA, running off 3 wins from the first 4 races as well. I don't think that is something that most people expected, with Santi coming back for his 3rd season, Colton coming back for his 2nd, his teammate. So, I mean, there's some fun stuff. Even though we don't have the big car counts, let's not mistake that for a lack of quality in terms of driver talent towards the front of the Indy Lights field, right?
Absolutely, and I mean, really, if he doesn't mess up, it should have been 4 for 4, right?
Yep.
I mean, he had a 7-second lead in St. Pete and crashed. So, I mean, he definitely has the speed to do it. And yeah, you're right. I completely overlooked Aaron here on that, just mainly because I didn't even see him on the standings. But it's because of that. I almost forgot he was on pole at that first race in St. Pete, and he hasn't completed a lap until I think it was the last race in Barber. So, yeah, it's been a terrible start for him, but he's also one that has the speed and ability to do it.
All right, 2 questions to go. This comes in from Josette Torres. Question for Gabby, croissants or crepes?
That really depends on the mood. It depends how the day's going and how you're approached at the end of the day, and then you might have a nice buttery croissant, or you might get a crepe, sprinkle a couple chocolates on it. It just depends.
Well, we did see the photo of you eating a croissant here after Barber, and at least with the way you're holding it, as I tweeted, it looks like it might have been the inspiration for the Harding Racing logo, too. So I just thought that was a very, nice message. You were sending a silent message to Simon that, hey, let's be friends and eat croissants. All right. All stupidity aside, let's go to our final question, and I love this because it's phrased perfectly. Kevin asks, could you discuss what's wrong with willpower right now? Well, first of all, Kev, the right now part is what has me laughing. There's always something wrong with Power. That is one of the world's strangest children that I've seen in my lifetime. Joking aside, love the guy. Weird, crazy, fun, you name it. But yeah, to your point, Kev, where you mentioned he's currently 10th in the standings, but, another brutal day at Barber. He's had many brutal days this year. He's asking, could the Indy GP be the place where he gets back on form? And what is going on with Power? I have to admit, this has been an ugly start to the season. The Barber crash wasn't his fault. We cannot pin that one on him. There have been some mistakes, him going out so soon at Phoenix, that certainly I don't think was a particularly necessary thing. But if there's one thing we've seen, Gabby, about Will Power, is he either starts off a season just like a raging animal, or it all seems to go wrong. And he's been through that boom or bust cycle enough where I think mentally, although we question if anything's up there at times, the guy is really strong mentally and has been through this before. So while it sucks for him, it doesn't concern me. For what you know about Power and what you've seen about his career, do you think this is something he's going to be able to shake off and kind of get back on track here pretty soon? Or do you think the cartoon anvil just has fallen in love with his car and him and is going to keep striking the guy?
Nah, man. I mean, this is one of the fastest guys in the series. I don't think he's worried about it. I don't think any of his fans should be. I think the guy's just kind of had a bit of a bad start. But, I mean, he's been quick everywhere, every track we've been to. He's driving, arguably the best car in the series, and he's arguably one of the fastest guys in the series as well. So I don't think he's worried. I wouldn't be worried if I was in his position, and I don't think any of his fans should be. I think it'll average out by the end of the year, and everyone will be close.
Mr. Chavez, thanks for not telling me to get the F out of here when I asked if you wanted to be on this week in IndyCar. And, I appreciate the fact that coming off a tough weekend, rather than just wanting to shut off your phone and ignore the world, you jumped right in and said, no, man, let's talk about it. Full credit to you for realizing that, IndyCar fans, whether it's good or bad, really enjoy connecting with you. And I know, along with myself, everyone appreciates the fact that you're willing to come in, answer some tough questions, have a little bit of fun, and hopefully put Barber behind us.
Absolutely, man. I always enjoy the chat. I always enjoy connecting with the fans. So anytime that I can do this, I love to.
Hopefully after the Indy GP, when we speak, it's because something really good has happened. So on that, we will bid farewell to this episode of the Week in IndyCar on the Marshall Pruett podcast presented by Cooper Tires, and we will speak to you next week after the 3-day Indy Open test at Indianapolis Motor Speedway.